Hello everyone, welcome to another Evan Hill Trains YouTube video slash podcast. Hope everyone is doing very well. Today we have 4 topics to cover. We're going to be talking about cluster sets, hip thrusts, range of motion, and nutrition. Specifically, protein and the difference between MYOPS and total body protein synthesis. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but you're going to find plenty of value from each of these. Cluster sets are going to be great for strength building. Range of motion, super important for injury prevention. Hip thrusts, the best athletic movement you can do, which you'll find out why soon enough. And muscle protein synthesis versus total body protein synthesis, which can be great for weaseling out rubbish marketing and bullshit research versus actual helpful information. So make sure you stick around so that you understand everything. Also, I am wearing a hoodie underneath the Evan Hill Trains shirt because it's very cold. No rubbish comments about that. I did just quickly want to promote the Evan Hill Trains Strength Guide. I spent a really good amount of time putting it together, going into really good depth about how much you should be doing, how hard you should be pushing, and how to progress over time with your strength training. I've also included a few special considerations which can help you avoid the silly little mistakes that people make around their training that can make a huge difference in the long run. All you have to do is click the link in the description and you will get it for free. Let's get into it. So our first topic is cluster sets. Now, what is a cluster set? A cluster set is an advanced training technique where we split up our weight training sets and add rest in the middle of the set. So commonly people will do 2 to 4 clusters of anywhere from 1 to probably 3 reps at most. So you're thinking 1 plus 1 plus 1, 2 plus 2 plus 2, 3 plus 3 plus 3, that sort of thing. And the rest in between can also vary from, you want to do at least 30 seconds rest, essentially. 30 seconds rest and then jumping straight into the next cluster. Now, on top of this, you can do multiple cluster sets. So you could do 2 1 plus 1 plus 1s or 2 2 plus 2 plus 2s so that you're still getting a good amount of volume in. Now, I personally don't actually do these very often, but that's because I am fine doing the boring old straight sets of the exact same amount of reps. So I find that cluster sets are only really useful as a way to spice things up. They don't provide anything novel in the form of like stimulation or overload or anything like that. There's no novelty to it aside from the fact that it's different and potentially new to some people. I think I've done these 1 or 2 times, and for me, they also just felt a little bit funny, whether I was doing that right at the time, up in the air. Who would I give these to? Mainly like using these for time effectiveness because we can get a similar amount of effective reps as we would in, say, 2x5, which is 10 stimulating reps in 2x5. And if we were to do the 3 plus 3 plus 3 at a 5 rep max load, we should be getting 9 stimulating reps in a much shorter time frame. But then there's just so much nuance because then potentially if you're doing the cluster set, you are adding more weights on because you're lifting a heavier load. All of these sorts of things. But I find that they're just generally slightly more time efficient and of course a little bit more fun. The best way to implement cluster sets is to either figure out what your 3 rep max is on the movement you want to cluster set or your 5 rep max. That way, if you wanted to do slightly higher reps, you can use a 5 rep max load and then do your cluster set, and you're going to have reps in reserve likely diminish a little bit as you go, but still be really efficient. Or the same thing goes if you want to lift a little bit heavier, maybe you do some singles, still having reps in reserve, you're using a 3 rep max load, which you know because you've tested it, and you can just scale that up over time by adding a little bit every few weeks. So really easy to implement if you want to do them. You just do a 5 rep max, do a 3 rep max, and then next time you come into the gym, you can use that exact same load for your cluster and just tinker with it a little bit to make sure that you're not getting too close to failure or hitting failure at the end of your cluster. The whole point with these is that the quality stays really high throughout the cluster set. We're putting rest in the middle so that we can stay really fresh the whole time. So for this reason, they generally do sort of favor strength training, so specifically powerlifting, opposed to general training for hybrid pursuits, athletic pursuits, or bodybuilding. We actually want a little bit of fatigue when we're doing our bodybuilding so that our reps can slow down and we can increase tension. And that's going to help for hypertrophy. But we may not be super interested in maximizing hypertrophy when strength training, and then want to actually keep our bar velocity up a little bit higher. So there's definitely a lot of use cases, but they're very niche. And a lot of the time it can just be achieved by changing your traditional resistance training prescription to then match what you're trying to do. For example, you want to keep your bar speeds higher and you want to still match your normal volume of stimulating reps in your session. So you're doing your squats, you're doing, like I say, you're doing a 2x3+3 cluster set with your 5 rep max load. So you're probably going to do your first 3 with 2 reps in reserve, you take a 30-second rest, and maybe you lose 1 rep in reserve. And so you do 3+3, and that last rep is noticeably more challenging. Then you take a nice big rest, and then you're going to repeat that same thing for the second cluster and probably be at 0 reps in reserve or just barely at 1 on that last rep of your second cluster set. Okay, so you do 3, rest for 30, 3, rest for probably 2 to 5 minutes, and you do 3, rest for 30, 3. That is 12 stimulating reps, and you've stayed far from failure for most of them. So probably only the last rep of each cluster set, so the 6th rep in each lot, will be the one that's closest and would probably be a 1 rep in reserve for the first one and then a 0 reps in reserve for the second one. But we've got a lot of quality mixed in there, a lot of quality, which is what's so good about it. So all those other reps were really quick. Well, not really quick, but were good quality because they weren't super puffed like you would have been if you had kept going and doing the 6 in a row. Now, I rambled that out quite a bit. My point is, if we still want to get 12 stimulating reps, how can we do this and be the same, if not more effective than the cluster sets? Well, what I would say is we do a 3x4 or potentially even a 4x3 if you want to get really spicy. And you go, Evan, that's just 2 cluster sets of 3+3. You goddamn right. We can just take more time, and in general, it will be better. So instead of taking a 30-second rest in between your 3 reps, you can take a 2-minute rest. It's a crazy idea, but this longer rest will technically be better by a significant amount. We're not talking a marginal amount. You are building up metabolic fatigue. You're building up cardiac fatigue in that cluster set, even though it's only 3 reps. And if you take longer than 30 seconds to rest, then you will be more recovered for the next 3 reps. So if we boil this down, again, I need to refine this a little bit more. 3x4, 4x3 is better than 2x3+3 because we're simply just adding in more rest and doing it traditionally. We might be able to go a little bit heavier. And so it's going to be just that little bit better. But like I said, the nuance here is that cluster sets are more time effective. So if I wanted to get 12 stimulating reps as fast as possible, I might do 2x3+3. Isn't that crazy? Let's talk about why range of motion is so important for injury prevention, okay? This is the biggest transfer factor from your training This would be tied with eccentric strength as the biggest transferable factor from your training to actual game day injury prevention. So this is what decides whether when you're at top speed and you lunge for the ball, whether your hamstring rips straight off or if it is absolutely fine, you beat the you beat the defender and you kick a goal. This is the deciding factor. Range of motion. Why? Because we can only stimulate passive tension and muscle lengthening as far as we stretch the muscle. So if we consistently take a muscle into relatively shallow ranges of motion, we plateau our muscle length gains very quickly. But for certain movements, when our goal is to elicit these changes and improve our injury risk, so decrease it, we want to be progressing not only weight, strength, and muscle size, but also our range of motion. So my two favorite examples of this at the moment are pretty much, it's sort of, oh man, it's hard to say. In weight training, I still think you can plateau it relatively quickly. So if you say you get your repeated bout effect in essentially 2 weeks, but I would say you plateau your length gains on most machines within 8. So if you do a seated hammy curl, there's all odds that when you're training close to failure, that you will keep getting sore up to that 4-week mark. Your soreness will be greatly decreased after 2 weeks, probably still some hanging around at 4, and then as you get to that 8-week mark, you're plateaued. You cannot stretch the muscle any further to where it actually lengthens more. Now, I'm saying lengthen because I don't want to say sarcomerogenesis every time. I hope you can respect that. Muscle does not actually lengthen. You just add more segments along the muscle fiber. So when I say lengthen, just know that's what I mean. This is where stretching comes in. If you have someone who's really high risk, or if you think yourself are quite high risk, you can greatly benefit from taking advantage of this. If you've been doing that seated hamstring curl, which I think is the best hamstring injury prevention exercise you can do when you're doing it as an eccentric overload, if you want to really ramp up your gains, or take it that one step further, do stretching on top of it. This is where you can really push the muscle length. I would bet money that if you could do the front splits, you would never tear your hamstring again, because muscle strain injury, so soft tissue injury, is just so strongly correlated with muscle length. And if you have these strain related injuries just not happening, then you're not going to pull it off. You cannot ping a muscle that isn't getting strained enough. So people get so caught up on rate of force development being this huge mechanism for muscle injury risk, and it just isn't. It's secondary to length. If we have poor rate of force development, it means our muscle gets to a longer length during eccentric muscle contractions. And that is why eccentric strength is so important. But the main point we're talking about here is that length is the killer, not rate of force development. Okay? So if you, the force could be so insanely quick. It'd be like lightning striking the ground. But if you can do the splits, there's no range that is injurious to you. There's no injury mechanism position because you've already been there. So that's the part I want. If you made it this far in the video and you click off right away, I just want you to remember one thing, is that muscle strain is about length and nothing else. It's so primary that length is the biggest determinant. So if you max out your machine and that range of motion is no longer challenging, you haven't been getting sore for a really long time, then it's beneficial that if you want to further decrease your injury risk, that you do some stretching. And it doesn't have to be much. It can be, what's a good starting point? You can do a minute each side, twice a day. I would probably suggest that you do it every other day and you align it with your training schedule well, but that's as much as you need to do to start making progress. Very, very steep dose response curve and then plateau. So it doesn't take much to start making improvements. What about range of motion for strength? Now, I made a video on this for Nordics about the length to tension relationship. And we have the ascending limb, the plateau, and the descending limb. Now, this also has benefits for strength training. If we have muscles that we want to give advantage to during certain movements, say we wanted to improve the leverage of our glutes at the bottom of a squat, we would want to train in a way that gets our glutes to the descending limb as much as possible, because that then shifts the curve along as well. And you can see how this is beneficial for injury prevention, but also strength, because now our plateau, which is the point at which muscle fibers are at their most optimal length to contract and generate tension, which is synonymous with force, is lower. And so you have a better capacity to generate force at the bottom of your squat when your glutes are in a longer length position. So that's a good. How do we apply this? So that means that if you're specifically trying to become better at squat movements, I generally don't recommend this for people who want to get faster, because we actually want strong glutes in short positions and strong adductors in longer positions. And there's a way to sort of rat these out a little bit. So first one is I would suggest Bulgarians in this circumstances. I'm normally not a very big fan, for the obvious reason that they give you a crazy stretch in your hip. You're going into extreme degrees of hip flexion, especially if you were to do it front foot elevated. And then this is going to shift pretty much all of your hip musculature to the other end, to the low end of the length to tension relationship. It's going to move you generally as a lower body hip person towards the lengthened position, which, like I said, in some instances is good. I personally wouldn't do it for people who are trying to get faster. Another angle to look at range of motion is fatigue. From a fatigue standpoint, range of motion or large ranges of motion can also be quite harmful. So we know we have stretch-gated ion channels, and those are calcium ion channels. And we don't like calcium ions in the gym. We like them when we're trying to get fitter, but not in the gym. When we open these stretch-gated channels, they lead to more fatigue through a number of steps. But if we're going through a time period where we want to lessen fatigue and maintain outputs and essentially just be a primed athlete, so competition phases, think an Olympian a week or two out from the Olympics, they should be doing like 20% of the range that they have been doing previously for whatever reason. A lot of them probably already train in very shallow ranges, doing mainly Olympic lifting, concentric focus things. They better be doing it now. Really, really good tool. It is a really good tool, range of motion, because we can increase it for certain adaptations and certain outcomes that we want, and we can decrease it when we're just looking to maximize output in the short term. So again, decreasing range of motion and removing eccentric phases is a great way to lessen the overall fatigue of your weight training regime. So that could look like doing pin squats or box squats instead of a traditional back squat. It could mean setting up your machines in a shorter position. So on the hamstring curl, you can move the feet down. On the leg extension, you can move the pad out. There's so many different little tweaks that you can make that could make that 5 to 10% difference that you need right now, that you can then switch back to and keep getting the gains you are after once you've finished your competition period or this very critical time in your calendar year, say selection period even. you've got a trial game, all of that sort of stuff. So we're talking about the extreme lengthening side of things and the extreme shortening side of things for range of motion and the benefits we can get from each of those. Alrighty, you may have noticed that there is a couple of things different about me. I have shaved and it has been a couple of days, but I'm going to pick up right where I left off. We're going to be moving into our next topic, which is why are hip thrusts so good for athletic performance? There's one area where they aren't super helpful. So literally the only area that glutes do not help is in horizontal deceleration. So when we are decelerating from top speed, when we're changing directions, it is super knee dominant. This is one of the very late stage parts of any major rehab, especially when we're talking about knees. So super demanding on the knee. Everything else, literally everything else lower body related, is going to be hip dominant and glute dominant. That being that the vast majority of the force that is relevant to actual movement, not that's required for the movement, as in so that we're not leaking through the kinetic chain, comes from the hips and the glutes. So this is why hip thrusts are so critical in any running related sports gym programs. And we pick hip thrusts because it is the best glute exercise. It is peak resistance where the glutes have best leverage. So it's hardest at the top and glutes have best leverage at the top. So we're training the muscle how it likes to be trained in the most advantageous position. And it's a stable setup with lots and lots of different ways to do it and very easy to progress long term. Everyone should be doing hip thrusts. If you're doing a running sport or jumping sport, anything like that, you must be doing hip thrusts. I would recommend doing it twice a week. This is one of the exercises that you can treat very simply and use your classic 2 by 4 to 8 reps with 0 to 1 rep in reserve, and use the double progression model long term to keep progressively overloading your training. It really does not need to be very, very fancy. This will be the most correlating thing you can do in the gym as well. So when people talk about things that transfer to the gym, and a lot of the time the argument that's brought up is that it has to look similar to the activity, or it has to be fast, and it has to be athletic looking. When we boil things down and make them as simple as possible, that's actually what translates best. And hip thrust is the perfect example of that. Single joint, single muscle, and we are driving a ton of hypertrophy, a ton of motor unit recruitment in that muscle, both of which are the only two things that will one-to-one correlate to performance. So coordination doesn't. Let's say you are hip thrusting 140 kilos at the start of a preseason, and by the end of that preseason, you are hip thrusting 180 kilos. Which, if it's the first time you've done it, is actually quite a realistic progression. You may even get higher than that. And this is in the space of about 3 or 4 months, probably more on the 3 side. If it's the first time doing it, you could make that much. It's very realistic progression. And because you've gotten so much stronger, you've improved your motor unit recruitment and you've improved your hypertrophy, your glutes are bigger. Their ability to produce force is going to be much greater, and you will literally be faster and jump higher. Just from the hip thrusts. That's not counting any of your plyometrics, any of your other exercises, any of your sprint work, any of your speed work. Literally, if you had done nothing else but hip thrusts and a field session a week, you would have gotten faster and jumped higher. This is just how crazy they can be. They are so incredibly good and so incredibly critical to add into your program. So I stress again, make sure you're doing them twice a week and for 1 to 2 sets of 4 to 8 reps. With 0 to 1 reps in reserve is a great place to start. Build your intensity up as well. Don't start at 0 to 1 rep in reserve when it's new to you. This isn't an exercise that generally has any special considerations either. We literally just want to get as strong at it as we can. There's no benefit to doing it in a power. There's no benefit to doing it from a power standpoint and trying to move the bar faster. You want max intent, but still as heavy as you can go. And a really good rule for progressing, like I said, you use the double progression model, which is adding reps in the rep range, and then once you get to the top of the rep range, adding weight. So if something starts to feel easy, you either add reps or weight. say if you do 8 and that's a really smooth 8 where you only had one rep that really slowed down, you would want to add quite a considerable amount of load. Say 5 kilos is a good place to start. This is going to be one of the best transferring exercises, and it won't be one that stops. You seriously cannot be limited in your benefits from this exercise. There is no point at which getting a 200 kilo hip thrust, a 300 kilo hip thrust, a 400 kilo hip thrust ever stops making you faster, because your glutes are the muscle that have the greatest opportunity to contribute to speed and movement in your lower body kinetic chain, because they sit up earlier in the proximal to distal sequence. So they get a longer opportunity to contribute force, and so increasing the muscle's force output capacity cannot not transfer. So this is why it's so important. If I myself were not biased towards SBD, I would start every single session with hip thrust. I would not worry about squatting. I would do hip thrust and then leg press. I know I caught a lot of flack for suggesting people do that. How dare I? But it is the perfect sequence in my opinion, because you're going hip thrust, super stable, great glute driver, and then you still get your squat pattern, which I would say is still worth doing for a lot of people, unless you're at the extreme advanced level and you're trying to push very specific adaptations. It's important to do a squat pattern on top of hitting hip flexors, hamstrings, quad isolation, adductor isolation, calves, that sort of thing. Let's circle back to the sport-specific objection for hip thrusts. A lot of people would say, like I said, that their movements need to look quick and movements need to look similar to the athletic movements that we're trying to improve. But if we really boil it down and we think about if we're trying to do, say, a counter movement jump, and in game that would be potentially jumping up for a ball that you've had to sit under, or you've gotten a one-step run up into and then you're double leg jumping, you are hinging at the hips, flexing at the hips, and then rapidly extending, which is going to come from your glutes. Now, if we can just increase glute capacity, we don't have to worry about anything else. So if we just increase our leg extension, muscle mass, and motor unit recruitment, then that's going to increase their force output. If we can increase our hip thrust strength and increase our glute muscle mass and motor unit recruitment, we've just improved our force output capacity for the two primary movers in that movement. So there, it cannot not transfer over. Whereas if we're doing something where there are many limiting factors, such as an Olympic lift, so a lot of people like to compare a power clean and say that that is what transfers best to jumping. This is going to be limited by coordination hugely and have very little tension, and I would say a lesser capacity for increase in motor unit recruitment because of that coordination demand. So we're detracting massively from our ability to increase muscle mass and increase motor unit recruitment, which will then decrease the actual gains in force output capacity. So instead of increasing muscle mass at the knee, increasing muscle mass at the hip, and increasing force output capacity for both of them, which then will very close to what I would say is a one-to-one transfer over, as in every unit of strength or improvement you gain then transfers into a unit of performance gain. We won't necessarily get that from a power clean, because so much of the improvement in power cleans comes from getting better at power cleaning and not improving our physical capacity. So we want to focus on improving physical capacity in the gym and not building skills, because we want to focus on building skills at training. A really good way of looking at rehab and performance is thinking about what we're trying to work on. Are we trying to build physical capacity, or are we trying to build skill? Because that can guide our prescription and recommendations. So if we want skill, then we would do things earlier in the session, potentially higher volumes, and then try and mimic the sport patterns, mimic demands. But if we want physical capacity and things that are going to translate no matter what we're doing, then we need to train for that. We need to train stable, train heavy, single joints potentially, and really think about what's going to lead to essentially the greatest motor unit recruitment improvements, which is high effort and strength, and then the greatest hypertrophy. Of course, we want that in certain areas and less in others. Let's talk about why a protein shake before bed is not making any difference to your hypertrophy gains. Now, this is one I had a question about a long time ago when I saw a very misleading social media post that was inferring that a protein shake before bed increases protein synthesis and then leads to increased hypertrophy. But this is not the case. This is a great example of someone who does not care about putting out accurate information as much. They want to put out something that is viral, and they want to put something out that appeals to people's biases for easy success. And so they put out a protein shake essentially improves hypertrophy. Again, the point I want to make here is that there is a big difference between total body protein synthesis and myofibrillar protein synthesis, also known as MYOPS. Now, MYOPS is almost exclusively, and I only say that because because I can't exclude anything else, but I know there is only one main cause of MYOPS, and that is mechanical tension from resistance training or physical activity. That is the only thing that will significantly influence myofibrillar protein synthesis and lead to muscle gain. Mechanical tension. So a lot of people might say metabolic stress can help, muscle pumps, DOMS, soreness, time under tension. These are all not great representations of mechanical tension and are not causes of increases in myofibrillar protein synthesis or MYOPS. So, when we think about hypertrophy, we only want to think about MYOPS. We don't want to think about protein synthesis because muscle fibers, myofibrils, are not the only proteins we have in our body. We have a countless amount of proteins in our body, and they all require their own attention. Now, one of the most, or what I would say is the second most notable proteins in our body, is collagen. Now, collagen is a critical part of movement and health because it makes up so much of our tendons and ligaments. If you think about how much of your body is made up of tendons and ligaments and how critical it is to movement, how much punishment and damage they would experience in day-to-day living and training, protein synthesis and protein breakdown and turnover plays a huge part in recovery and performance. So I'm not saying here that total body protein synthesis is useless. I just want you to understand that when someone says protein synthesis, you don't instantly go to hypertrophy, because that is a great way to be taken advantage of by marketing and people searching for clicks, or again, like I was saying earlier, trying to appeal to your bias and make you change your behavior for no reason, essentially. One little thing that may come from this as well is that is there a benefit to timed protein ingestion? Now, would I say yes? Yes. I would say that there has to be some sort of benefit to timing because your body likes food, and potentially if you're on a large fast and trained, your body may not recover optimally. But would I say it's significant? No. So that's the line I want to draw. Is there a potential tiny benefit? Definitely. Doesn't matter? No. So timing throughout the day should not be something you stress about. It may be something you pay attention to and you try and space out your food evenly. I would say that's probably a healthy thing to do as well, instead of fasting and binging, or if you're trying to lose weight, fasting is actually a great tool. So just understand that those are also separated. We're talking about just general and athletic use. Space out your meals, preferably eat after training. Really simple. And then on top of that, your protein intake is daily. It's not time it anyway special. You can absorb protein for breakfast, you can absorb protein at lunch, you can absorb protein at dinner, you can absorb and utilize protein at any time of the day. You can also absorb a lot of protein at once. So if you were to accidentally go a lot of the day mainly on carbs or potentially some fats as well, and you haven't necessarily hit a great protein number for the day yet, having a protein shake after dinner or with dinner or before bed are all great options to supplement that protein intake. But it's also worth noting it's not the end of the world if you don't hit your protein goal on one day, because as long as you still met your energy requirements, you will not be losing muscle. Your total protein muscle gain for the day may be slightly suppressed, but not greatly. So again, not something worth stressing about, because we know stress is bad. We know stress is bad. One thing I would say, and I've been quite a large fan of this recently, is that having something cumbersome on the stomach and protein shakes can be very not stressful on the stomach, but significant. They take some time to digest. Some people can have a little bit of GI disturbance or irritants. And if you do this close to bedtime, you will be negatively affecting your sleep. And this would be significant to me because Huberman made a reference to it recently, and I do remember hearing it, that, and I might fact check myself on this one, is that you release a lot of your growth hormone in the first couple of hours of sleep. And if that's being disturbed by digestion, you can be suppressing your growth hormone release and overall also decreasing the quality of your sleep. So I would really suggest that if you're going to have a protein shake, you have it with dinner or directly after dinner, so that there's a significant gap between dense and cumbersome food and sleep. So normally I would aim for about 1 to 2 hours. Again, not something worth stressing over, but it is worth trying to optimize if you can. That is going to be all the topics we had to cover today. Thank you for listening and watching all the way through. I greatly appreciate it. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, make sure to drop a comment below. By the time this is posted, I will have published and made public my Ultimate Strength Guide, which will be linked in the description. This is a free download, and I think everyone has something to gain from this. So make sure you click the link below. All you need to do is provide your email so I can send it to you, and then boom, you get some really good, actionable, usable information so that you can start applying it to your training straight away and increasing your rate of strength gain. Also, if you're looking for more personalized support or a more tailored program, make sure to go to my website and book a consultation call or have a look at my suite of programs. So make sure to click the link in the description below and get your Ultimate Strength Training Guide. Thank you very much for listening. Make sure to leave a review on the podcast and drop a like on the YouTube video, and I will see you next time.